innovations and impact. So you could start applying for internships. If you are interested in internships, you could apply for internship in our company, Biodesign Innovation Labs. We are primarily focused on intensive care products, respiratory care products, and maternal and child health products. So you could, Dr. Sahani was saying that from month of May you would be looking for internships. So you could reach out to me. We could have a discussion. So today I'll be talking about few important devices which are widely used, but these devices are largely developed by big companies like Philips, GE, but there is an alternative need for all these devices, either the cost factor or the portability factor or the simple use cases, that convenience of using by doctors. All these things are a need. So here we are talking about neonatal physiological monitor. So if you look at the statistics, if you look at any the mortality rate in children under 5, it is very high in developing countries. So there is a child dying every 1 in 20 seconds due to pneumonia. There is more than 5,000 deaths per day due to respiratory illnesses. All these things are mainly because there is a accessibility issue, there is a affordability issue, and there is a huge burden of diseases in developing countries due to disparities in doctor and patient ratio, due to disparities in access to the medical resources, access to the medical devices. So most of the existing medical devices are right now in India are imported from foreign companies from abroad. So the government of India is kind of pushing towards medical device innovation, so we could develop indigenous innovations that need not be necessarily be we don't have to import from big companies all the time. So more than 80% is imported. So we could have our own indigenous products. So one of those products, a lot of innovations is happening in maternal and child health. So if you look at this product, the problem it is kind of solving is basically it is monitoring vital parameters. Vital parameters. It's fine, yeah. So for any disease, it is important that you actually recognize it at early stage. When you recognize it, it could be a diagnosis. It could be a diagnosis of pneumonia. It could be a diagnosis of jaundice. And if say there is a newborn child and you wanted to do a lot of screening. Screening could be related to if the child is able to hear sound. So you are basically doing some kind of sending some, you are having an earphone and giving some kind of a sound and checking if the child is responding. So a lot of screening can be done. So there is a lot of need for newborn, innovations in child health. So if this device is, existing devices are like state of the art. It measures respiratory rate, ECG, heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, SpO2. Sorry? We make innovative products. So innovative products as in like we don't reverse engineer anything. So the process of innovation is like I am observing a problem, identifying that specific need in hospital, and basically making a device which is solving a problem, but it not necessarily it is something which is replicated or it is something similar. It is totally different in a way that one example would be existing state-of-the-art devices would be Doppler effect, ultrasound imaging for diagnosing fetal heart rate, for checking if there is a fetal heart rate. So you could also do this by other mechanisms like using electrodes, patch mechanism, and getting the signals. So there are different ways of doing things, and existing these devices like GE Healthcare or Philips, these are expensive devices, and how we can reduce the cost, not only the cost, and how we could improve the quality of care, improve the quality of performance, improve the functional ability. All these things matters. Yeah. So does that answer your question? So one of the things is like there could be a huge device, X-ray machine, which does the same thing. I could make a portable device which is more faster, more effective, the performance. So
without the importers, so we can focus also on reverse engineering.
Sorry?
To cut out the import.
Yeah.
We can also focus on reverse.
So reverse engineering is not an innovation. Reverse engineering, you are basically looking how the device is working, and you are basically making a small modification in it and just saying that this is different. So when someone has a patent on it, they could say that you are basically change a small modification in my device. There is nothing different in this. So what you could do is the innovation process, which I have explained you in the medical yesterday and day before yesterday. So that is the way that you go through a medical innovation process, where you genuinely identify some problem, and that problem is something that is crucial for you to solve it. In terms of that, this is a problem that I care about. This is a technology that I know. This is a skill set that I have, and how can I get the rest of the gray areas, and how can I put together and make a product and build a team and make a company, and commercialize the product. So SpO2 is very important. So do you know what is SpO2? Yeah, so the oxygen saturation levels in the blood, and it is being done with pulse oximeters also. So there is separate pulse oximeters available, and temperature, you could use some sensors. So all these things you could basically use some kind of a sensors and basically monitor all these variables. And these are some of the existing monitors which are available in hospitals, and for any baby to to have warm, because you could see the cold weather here. So obviously if we could not tolerate this kind of a cold, how do you think a child can tolerate? So it is very important that there is a continuous monitoring is there for a child to check, because a lot of morbidity happens below the age of 5 years and below the age of 1 month, 5 months. So very important to check all the variables like the respiratory rate, the temperature, and so on and so forth, and also the heart rate. So there are a fetal heart detector. So fetal heart detector is like, if you use a stethoscope, you cannot actually hear the sound of a fetal heart rate. It would have to be like a late stage pregnancy to actually check the fetal heart rate. But existing state-of-the-art devices has a Doppler effect, ultrasound imaging, where you could see the fetal heart rate starting from 12 months, starting from 12 weeks, less than around 4 to 12 weeks. So the doctors can use this mechanism to check whether the fetal heart rate is as per the WHO guidelines, and if the child is safe. And it kind of gives a reassurance to the mother and health workers and doctors. So these are expensive devices. So a lot of innovations are coming right now in startups, in healthcare industry, to come up with electrode-based, portable electrode-based mechanism, where a silicon-based patch is used, so that they are connecting that to the mother, and it is going to basically a remote kind of a tool, and that is taking all the variables, sending it to the cloud and to the monitor. So they could look at the fetal movement, they could look at the fetal heart rate, and they could look at the the blood pressure and other variables, and this gives alerts when something goes wrong, when a uterine contraction, when some parameters are going beyond the normal levels, though it could give an alert and make the health workers. So it also it can also save lives. Basically, if something goes wrong, if they take action, it can save lives. So this is so the reason why I'm showing this device and the previous device is because these are state-of-the-art devices. There is a lot of innovation that can be done with the existing devices, which are faster, cheaper, easy to use, better in terms of performance. So those things, if you say my focus area is I want to solve the problems in newborn or maternal health or cardiac health, so you should go to the relevant hospitals or the relevant clinical settings and observe and try to get as neat specifications as possible, and then drill down to your core need statement and then come up with the design process. That design process helps you to come up with novel indigenous products. Yeah. So this one. So ultrasound imaging, right? So you're basically hearing the sound of a fetal heart rate. The child which is not yet born, you're hearing that child's heart by sending ultrasound signals, and we are basically imaging that in a monitoring tool. So the mechanism is pretty widely used, and basically ultrasound is the state of the art. Yeah. So pulse oximeter is basically you are measuring the oxygen saturation level. Does anybody know what is hypoxemia? You know hypoxemia. Can you tell? Yeah, what is the level? Yeah. You know? What is at what level do you say that you diagnose it as a hypoxemia? Can anybody make a guess? No, if it goes below 90, it's hypoxemia. So the SpO2 is the oxygen saturation levels in the blood. If you take a pulse oximeter and you put your finger and if you see, you would basically get around 97. You can see that is 97, and that is HR is heart rate. So if the saturation level goes below 90, or if it goes below 92, which means that you are deprived of oxygen in your blood. So what happens is many times when there is a trauma or when there is some kind of a cardiac arrest or some kind of a very bad illness, the saturation levels in the blood might go down, and then the patient is not able to breathe, and that will lead to hypoxemia, which means that the saturation levels, the patient is need of a ventilator support. So when you give a ventilator support, the saturation level increases, so you are basically saving the patient. So that is what we are doing, developing the ventilators and respiratory support to save lives. So what happens is in children, they are more susceptible for viruses or these illnesses. So for example, now there is an outbreak in China. How many of you heard? Coronavirus. So it's a pneumonia. So it's a kind of pneumonia, but a very different pneumonia. So a lot of these outbreaks and epidemics happen all the time. And this is a flu season, and these viral infections, spread from human to human, or animals to humans, and it is causing a huge, problem in terms of mortality and illnesses and economic loss. So what the government is trying to do is bring in preparedness and prevention mechanisms. So you could isolate certain things, and you could isolate, the places where the outbreak is happening and contain these diseases. So it's very important to know the epidemiology factor, like what are the existing. So because this will kind of give you a perspective of what to focus and how you could build some solutions which can address these things. So vaccines are given, but vaccines take a lot of time. Since it is a new virus, coronavirus, it takes a lot of time to come up with some vaccine, which basically is given. For example, Ebola has come. So what is that other disease? Ebola, and then SARS, SARS, and a lot of there was one more outbreak which happened earlier in Brazil. What is that? Zika virus. Yeah. So these are things. So your constant parameter would be the pulse oximeter. They would constantly check what is the blood oxygen saturation level. And how many of you heard ABGA? Do you know what is ABGA? ABGA is another parameter. In addition to SpO2, ABGA is basically arterial blood gas analysis. So you will know what is the other gases in your body when you take a blood sample and you analyze it. Basically labs do that. So you will know the arterial blood gas analysis. That will basically give what is the CO2 levels, what is the other elements of things in addition to oxygen. So the basic principle here is spectrophotometer. It is basically emitting certain light, and it is, you are getting back the light, and there is electrodes and sensors, and it is doing the, it is basically diagnosing the respiratory disorder also by the heart rate. So anybody is working on cardiac related projects? Yeah, you're working? Yeah. Does anybody working on cardiac related projects? Okay. You'll start working. Okay. So I think this is a device which can be used in cardiac monitoring. So if there is a cardiac surgery that has to be done, so the doctor has to know how the patient's heart is working, whether it is normal, or whether in terms of the blood flow or in terms of the arterial or the pathological scenarios. So they are checking to diagnose if there is anatomical defects of the heart, determine the blood flow, and using the same ultrasound imaging. And ultrasound imaging will give you, the pattern of how the heart is working and so on and so forth. In terms of the tissues and so VR and AR. So VR and AR is basically you are using. Does anybody know what is stroke? Stroke. No, right? Stroke. So once a patient who has suffered from stroke, they will have to get some kind of a rehabilitation. So the rehabilitation could be a speech therapy. They would have to practice certain speech, or they would have to do some exercise. They will have to do some some kind of training, gamification. So that now there are devices which are coming, which are basically having a game kind of a simulated environment, and it is basically involving the patient to do certain kind of a gamification factor where the patient is being involved in doing some kind of activity. So he's being recovered doing the gamification process using this physical training and speech therapy. So this is another device called Bilirubinometer, and it is mainly used for diagnosis of jaundice. So one of the startups which were funded is also working on finding the jaundice, basically taking a blood sample and diagnosing if there is a diagnosis for jaundice. And one of the symptoms is basically looking at yellowish discoloring of the skin and eyes. Mainly it's for newborns. So the treatment for this is basically using phototherapy. There are devices which are already there, and these devices are widely used, and CE marking is pretty much required because it is going to be used for newborns and children under 5, and jaundice is like a very widely widespread disease, and this can be used for diagnosis. So there is a lot of innovation that is also needed in this space for diagnosis, and much more better without the need for invasive taking a sample. For example, right now there are devices, you take a blood sample and you diagnose if there is a jaundice, there is an autojaundice, or so that is based on spectrophotometry. But if you could come up with some non-invasive technology, that is a need that doctors are looking for. So stroke rehab patients, and this is a cardiac monitoring. So cardiac monitoring, so there was a paper which was published by Stanford. So what they have done is andrewing. Do you know andrewing? Yeah. So there was some 40 neural network something, and they have compared with existing doctors' treatment and their treatment, and their algorithm is far more better than these physicians. Not only for they have done this similar variable based mechanism where they are kind of taking all the ECG signals and they are putting it into a neural networks, and they are basically saying that their results are much more better than the doctors. So it's because the algorithms are trained in such a way that it is looking for all the patterns of prognosis. So prognosis is before you make a diagnosis, and the pattern, the behavior of how the signals are working. So they are able to look at those signals and say that these are the patterns of these many patients before getting diagnosed with arrhythmia, which is basically a different pattern that in your heart works, and how you could use the prognosis information and train it in a neural network and use it for variables and basically make a prediction.
Provided enough data, AI can treat human beings on
Yeah.
What happens is most of the diseases, the data is not available in a form which can be directly fed into machine learning.
Yeah.
But if data is available in that form, what happens is, suppose a doctor can see in his lifetime, say 10 lakh patients, I don't know.
Yeah.
Suppose the AI algorithm is trained over 1 crore data set, that means it is equivalent to 10 doctors' lifetimes of experience, which it knows, which cannot be matched by a doctor. So that's why that can always be done. But most doctors don't agree with it because they don't understand.
Because the liability, the doctor is always liable, not the machine.
And again, many times doctors don't understand AI.
Yeah.
Second, they also want to live in denial, some of them, which I feel, better wake up. AI may take over.
Yeah, AI might take over the radiologist work most of the times when. But the final call will be on the doctor side.
That would be, I would say, debatable in some years. When AI starts performing better than doctors maintain, then that may also come into question, I feel. But that's a discussion which probably.
It's a ethics and yeah. But AI for good is always something which can make our lives more easier and automate the processes. Yeah. So the variables combined with AI is something that is a huge potential, and how you could connect with use the data, and not just data, good data. So if you are having very limited data, but even if it is a good data, that can be used as an initial for publications and to prove something, and then you could write research proposals to prove your to prove your concept, and then go for a product commercialization. So variables has a huge impact, and there's companies like a lot of companies are working on variables combined with AI. So I've gone through a few of the devices, right? So we'll just do a small exercise kind of a thing. So where, say this device called, what is that? The jaundice diagnosis device. Yeah. So what would be, if you are to develop that device, so what would be your key activities? Can anybody say? If you are developing, what would be your key activities? So this is a business model canvas. So it is basically a whole guidelines for you to look at what kind of activities, what kind of customer segment you are distinguishing. Yeah. So key activities. If any medical device company, probably it would be R&D, designing devices, working with vendors, working with hospitals, doctors. So that would be your key activities. Key resources.
Sales, which is going around the doctors and
Yeah.
push the device.
Yeah.
I think R&D becomes less of activity as the device grows in its maturity.
Exactly. But R&D big companies always spend up to 20% in R&D their revenue. Yeah.
But if you have one particular technology in which your company is maybe specialized, after a while,
you want to keep doing marketing and pushing it. Yeah.
Pushing that in the market.
So your key partners could be some of the software providers or some of the vendors who are giving you certain components. For example, if I am making a shoe which is basically a wearable for a child, and that shoe has some sensors, and that sensors is basically measuring all the sleep apnea and respiratory pattern. So my potential partner could be the sensor makers, and I am getting those sensors and I'm designing and I'm basically partnering with those people or the manufacturers who are making some of these materials components. So your cost structure could be basically, if the device is at 3,000, you are selling it at 10,000. So that would be your cost structure and the margins. And revenue streams could be basically, if you are looking at medical devices. So there are different revenue streams. It could be a licensing, or it could be a sales where you're directly selling it to hospitals or through government channels, or you're collaborating with some NGOs. So NGOs have access to a lot of these hospitals to do some kind of a pilot studies, or to do some kind of efficacy studies, or to work with health workers. So those could be your revenue streams. And channels is basically how are you basically getting to your customers. So your customer segments could be government, or it could be basically doctors, or it could be basically nursing homes. It could be any of the big hospitals. The customer segments you will have to define. And how are you basically, what is your value proposition? So value proposition, it could be a algorithm which basically is different. You have a proprietary patent. Those things are your value proposition. And customer relationship is basically, if you meet a lot of doctors in a conference like neonatal, neocon, or pediatric conferences, there you meet a lot of these doctors, and these doctors could be your potential customers from those hospitals, because once you have a relationship with the doctor in terms of telling them that my device does such kind of performance, and it is far better and superior with existing devices, and can also be used as an alternative for big devices, big company devices. So they would invite you to come and give a demonstration in hospitals, and they would essentially recommend it to the purchase team to purchase your devices. So that could be your customer relationship, where you're reaching out through website, or reaching out through conferences, or directly. So, and customer segments are doctors. Key resources could be your R&D members, your advisors. Key resources could be your the labs that you use, the kind of technology that you have. That are key resources. So these are the things that you need to know when you are trying to start a startup. Do you have any questions in this business model canvas? So this is an example for Netflix. So Netflix has, does anybody use Netflix? Yeah. So Netflix, their customer segments could be internet users and TV channels. So TV channels, basically they are licensing out, TV channels could be licensing out some of the content to Netflix, so they have some exclusive. Our internet users is basically people like us watching some kind of on a subscription model to look at this is their Netflix is their, this is customer segment. So Tesla, so they more focus on the the products which are more sustainable and far more superior than existing cars. At the same time, it is also eco-friendly. So people who buy Tesla could be environmentalists, and customer segment could be people who make good annual income. And Fitbit. So Fitbit is the wearable watch. So people who have, so this is an example what would be the customer segment for Fitbit, where people who are health conscious could use it. That could be their customer segment. So, and the people who could be using it could be middle income and high income people, and